Okay, so I guess everything is all set. Let me start my little timer. I don't want to go too far over. Hello, timer. Start. No. Stopwatch. Start. Okay, got it. Sorry. Okay, my name is Maggie Thomas. My maiden name is Horne, Maggie Horne Thomas. I am from Statesboro, like raised here through college. I was actually born in Swainsboro in Emmanuel County, so very close. I have family in central Georgia counties and south and central east Georgia counties. And like I said, I live up in Cobb County in Atlanta. I have no relatives up there, no ancestors up there. So any work I do is all down here. So my parents still live here. And like she said, I'm down here visiting them. And there are the reason why I did this presentation, honestly, several years ago was the first time I did it. And I did change it to 25th. Phew, I thought I had put 24th on there. So the reason why I did this several years ago is because I have quite a few personal examples of name changes like in my family. And so it was kind of something that I dealt with quite a bit while I'm doing my genealogy that I thought, well, I'm learning how to do it. Others can benefit from my experiences and my examples. Um, so to start off with, my first slide here. Oh no. Yeah. Nothing's working. Nothing.
You might have to just click it.
Just do the mouse.
Sorry.
Sorry, guys. Mouse. Okay. So first of all, in a perfect genealogical world, you're welcome to utopia here. In a perfect genealogical world, as you research your surnames back over years and years and thousands of ancestors and all that kind of stuff, every single one would have the same last name, and it would always be spelled the same. Everything would be neat and tidy in your genealogical world, like these color-coded file folders here. Neat, tidy, perfect. In reality, however, the name that we have today, honestly, only probably hasn't existed as it is for maybe a couple generations. So I know I can go back 3 generations and my name is different. So our names are actually pretty new when it comes to genealogical information. For the majority of human existence, people were identified only by a single name. So they had no surname, they had no last name. And that's mainly in Western culture. Not all countries are that way. But hereditary surnames, last names, were not in common use until like maybe the beginning of the 14th century in the British Isles. And so we're talking British, Irish, Scottish, Western Europe, mainly around the 14th century. There are, yeah. Why doesn't it like me? I guess I have to left click. I'm sorry, guys. I got it. Okay, so there are basic types of last names. Right here we have an example of patronymic last names, which comes from the fathers. So your last name is going to come from your father's first name. So here's 2 examples. We have, I'll start over on the right, Johann Peterson. The reason why he's named that is because his name is Johann, his father's name is Peter, therefore he is Johann, son of Peter, Johann Peterson. This caused a lot of problems because every single generation ended up having a different last name. So Johann's son was Paul, so his name became Paul Johnson because he's the son of John or Johann. You see what I mean? So Paul Johansson. But so there was no surname to look back at the same always. So as surnames would change from generation to generation. Sometimes there's no documentation. Most of the time, there's not going to be any documentation. That's just the way it was. And again, this is mostly in Western culture. I don't really have a lot of facts about surnames that come before family names, like in Asian culture. A lot of times they do that. But another example I have is descriptive versus occupational last names. So like I was saying before, maybe he had black hair, so his last name became Black. You have brown, brown haired, you have curly haired, Kraus, big, small, short. And then over here under occupational, you have farmer, miller, banker, all those typical names. And then you also have like Weber means weaver. I know I've heard both of those forms of that name. So these are just different types of surnames people could have had in the past, and that's why you have them now, because it's been passed down. So throughout the history of surnames, up to about the 20th century, changing one's last name was as simple as deciding to use that new last name. You didn't have to do anything about it. You didn't have to sign any papers. You didn't have to tell anybody. You're just like, oh, you know what? I feel like having a new last name. And there, you had a new last name. So why? Why did they change your last name? So I'm going to go over two basic types of name changes. I mean, there's lots of reasons, but two basic types. You have your purposeful, like they meant to do it. And then you have your accidental or your spelling differences. Maybe it was spelled wrong or pronounced wrong. So you have purposeful and you have accidental, basically. So first, I'll go over some Oh, and by the way, I don't have my PowerPoint copyrighted. So if y'all want to take pictures or anything like that, feel free. I know some people say don't, right, all rights reserved. I don't care. So, and that goes for the Zoom people. I'll take screenshots of everything. So, oh, that's covering it up right there. Anyway, it just says marriage records. So this is your first type of example for a purposeful documented change, because you have purposeful and documented, but then there's also like purposeful but not documented and stuff, So your first example is your marriage certificate, and this happens to be my mom, Patricia Ramey Scott. That was her first husband, Scott. Ramey's her maiden name. So there we have two name changes on this one document here. Going from, you see Ramey Scott, somebody's like, didn't know she was married first. I'm like, where did Scott come from? And then you got a whole new branch of people to research. But that's my dad, Joseph Augustus Horne. And so this was their marriage certificate in 77, just for an example. Oh, okay. And this is my mom's parents. That just shows an example of the announcement in the newspaper. So I know the first one's hard to read. The second one is actually a clipping that I have at home of the same basic thing. But my mom's last name was Ramey, so that was her father's name, and Drake was her mother's name. So you have two examples here of names and how and when they were going to change and why they changed. But you also have another name, Mr. and Mrs. T.E. Branch. Now, it says here they announced the engagement of their sister. So at this time, my grandmother Bertie, her parents were already dead. So her legal guardians, I guess, she lived with her sister and her brother-in-law. So yet another branch you have to research. Branch, haha. Okay, next example. This is my divorce record from my very first husband. And if you see down at the bottom, it says, the maiden name of the plaintiff is to be restored, to wit, Maggie P. Horne. So this is documenting my name change back to my original name. But it says at the top, see Maggie P. Seaborn, so you get documented changes from two different names there. Another example, these are adoption records. This is the adoption record from my mom. And so it shows like what her original last name was, Patricia Ann Floyd, and the name of her parents and the name of her new parent, her adopted parents, and then down the bottom it says Patricia Ann Ramey. So you very clearly see it went from Floyd to Ramey. And then over there is just a more, because this is like 1947, no, 1948. Over there is just a more recent example of an adoption record. And I blanked out the name there, but that's my son. And so his last name was my last name, Horne. But then my husband, my current husband, Charles Thomas, he did a step-parent adoption when Mason was in middle school. And so Mason kept Horne, so now he's Mason Horne Thomas. So that's just two examples of adoption records. This is another type of adoption information. This is when you surrender your parental rights, when you adopt out your child. Sometimes it's run in the newspaper. I actually have paperwork that's signed by my mom's adopted parents, biological parents signed their parental rights. This thing kind of happened automatically with Mason's original biological father. If a certain amount of time had gone by after putting it in the paper like this, then automatically he lost his parental rights because he didn't speak up. So this is what this newspaper article is here. And then I will go over this a little bit later at the end, but this is just an example of a name change, legal name change as an adult. I blocked out the names there. My son Mason, he was a minor. He was 16 when he changed his name. And so you can see that my name's up there, Maggie Horne Thomas and Charles Gary Thomas, what his last name was and what his new full name is. So like I said, I will go over at the end of the presentation a little bit more about this Mason and name changes for adults like that. All right, so next we have the 14th Amendment. Okay, so the 14th Amendment is aimed at granting all people the right to American citizenship, despite their ethnicities, their religious backgrounds, all that kind of stuff. But within the 14th Amendment, it also gives everybody the right to legally change their name. So the 14th Amendment says technically, as long as a person consistently uses the new name on all personal and business documents, the new name must be legally recognized by authorities. So this is what's called common law. The individuals can change their name at will. So you can change your name if you want to. My name is Maggie, and I decided I wanted to go by Laura for some reason. I just have to make sure I put Laura on everything I sign, everything I write. However, it cannot be changed to Laura just because I walk up to the Social Security office and say, I need a new card that says Laura. So some institutions, banks, insurance companies, etc., they do require that court order. But if I want to go to, I don't know, Walmart or Office Max or something and get new business cards made that say Laura Thomas, they're not going to ask me, prove your name is Laura. You can do whatever you want. So you have your common law and you have your federal law. However, also every state has its own law. So I changed my name for some reason here in Georgia. It's not always going to coincide with the laws of how I change my name if I'm living in Virginia. All states do recognize other states' name changes. So yeah, I changed my name here in Georgia. It's not going to revert back to my old name when I visit Virginia. But if I change it here or change it there, it could be different. It can get pretty complicated. It doesn't always get complicated, but it can. So I'm just, warning you ahead of time in case any of you guys want to change your names. So these are examples here of purposeful but undocumented. So you don't have a marriage license or something like that. So sometimes necessity. So we have a transliteration. And transliteration is to write or print a letter or word using the closest corresponding letters of a different alphabet or script. So this statement up here is Hindi, and the closest they could translate it into English letters would be Ek Nai Shurat, which I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it's not exactly the same. I mean, when it comes across translated this way, it means a new beginning. But this top one doesn't necessarily mean a new beginning. Maybe it means morning. You know, a new beginning is close to morning. But you understand the transliteration difference. Sometimes it's necessary. If someone was to move here, they can't write that Hindi statement when they sign things, and nobody's going to know what in the heck they just signed. So they change their name because they're here. But then when they go back to visit their parents and, they go back, they use their original name. A second example, simplification. Just because maybe you're already arrived in your new country and you live in a town that has a lot of Johnsons. So in order to keep it simple, like, okay, I'll spell my name the same as these people who are Johnsons because everybody knows that Johnson. But having to explain it every single time, why is your name spelled Jonsson instead of John? You know what I mean? So just simplified. Kind of like my last name, I'll get to that in a little bit. My last name, my maiden name has an E on the end, Horne. People my entire life have spelled it Horn. And sometimes it matters, and sometimes I just don't even care, so sometimes they just didn't even care. Maybe Albright was more of an understood name than the German version of Albrecht. Another example, fear of discrimination. So this motive constantly appears among Jews who were often faced anti-Semitism. And so I have other examples of discrimination here. Consider the following names that automatically identify your ethnic origin. So if it's written down and people are like, oh, that must be a Jewish person. And then you kind of, without realizing it, you have bias against them. Or you see an Islamic name and, especially with everything that's been going on since 2001, people are kind of wary of people who have Arab names. And it's sad, but it's true. And then these last names here are Irish examples, O'Sullivan and Murphy. So if you just take the O apostrophe off and have Sullivan, people don't always automatically assume that it's an Irish or a Scottish sounding name. So that's another 3 examples there. I have 3 more purposeful but undocumented examples. The top one is, along with the other ones, like desire to fit in goes along with simplification, kind of. So you have moved to a new country and a new culture, and you want to assimilate. You want to fit in with the rest of the community. So Brahoni is Irish or Celtic, I think, maybe it's Irish, and it literally translates to judge. So once they move to America and they find their community that they're going to live in, they just go by the last name Judge. That way people don't know they're automatically from out of town. Same with Iglesias. That is like Enrique Iglesias. That's a Hispanic name, Hispanic last name. Well, it literally means church. And I know plenty of people whose last name is Church. So maybe that's why they changed their name. Who knows? Desire to break with the past. Example, Mexicans fleeing to America. Sometimes they would flee with nothing on their backs, but nothing but the shirt on their backs. They wanted to break with the past. They left everything behind. They didn't bring anything with them. They wanted to get rid of the remembrance that they were part of the Mexican Revolution. So when they came over here, like, I'm changing everything else in my life, might as well change my name too. So last example I have is just plain old dislike of surname. So the example I have here is this is the Armenian-Turkish War in 1920. The Armenians were forced by the Turkish government when the Turkey invaded Armenia. They were forced to adopt names that sounded Turkish, not names that were Armenian. But the first chance that those Armenians got when they fled the country or they immigrated out of the country was change their name back to their original name. So you might have, for example, a census record from, let's just say 1860, and their last name is so-and-so. 1870, their last name is so-and-so. But then all of a sudden, 1880 through 1910, their last name's different? What? and then it goes back to being their old last name again. So you can't always assume that it was a mistake that their last name was written on there. It might have been a purposeful change, but there's no documentation for it. So you have, I mean, plethora of reasons why names get changed. So these are just a few. Next, I just want to mention the Ellis Island myth. When people immigrated over to New York, was the main port of entry in America. There were others, but New York was the main one. There's always this myth that my name was changed, my family's name was changed because they couldn't pronounce it, or they couldn't read it, or they couldn't spell it. They just decided, oh, whatever, we'll make your name something else instead. That is absolutely not true, because first of all of the ship passenger lists were made not in America when they landed. So you didn't have somebody writing stuff down that they didn't know what they were writing. All the passenger lists were made and recorded in the country they departed from. So you have Germans who speak German writing down German names and in Germany coming over to America. And that list of German names written by a German person in Germany is handed over to the person who works here. So they're not trying to spell something they don't know, so they didn't change it. Another thing people didn't realize is that immigration officials it was required of them to speak at least several of the major different languages. So they weren't just like, I only speak French, but this guy's, from Italy, so I don't know what he's saying. It wasn't like that. You had to speak French, you had to speak also Italian, you had to speak German. I mean, there were different languages that made you a better fit for certain parts of the immigration when you entered, so that you could work with the people who came in. Let's see, so this takes care of writing it down. However, really thick accents and stuff like that can lead to mispronunciation of names. So therefore, it can, over time, maybe your mispronunciation from one station, moving over to the next station, mispronunciation could make your name change down the line. However, they're not going to say like, well, this says so-and-so, but he just said so-and-so, so I'm going to change it. That didn't happen. It was just, miscommunication. Let's see. Next, I want to mention immigration and naturalization. This is really cool. I learned this when I was doing this, when I was fixing my little presentation here. Did you know that before 1892, the original point of destination in America was not Ellis Island, it was Castle Clinton. Well, at the time it was called Castle Garden National Monument. And you can see there that it's across New York Harbor. There's Ellis Island right over here. So people would come in here, and here's a picture of it. I'm gonna go around to the other side. So from 1855, see there's the Statue of Liberty there. And this is where they landed, this nice little castle inside this garden. It's called Castle Clinton now. I didn't read about why the name was changed. I should have, because it's a name change. But so from 1855 until 1892, January 1st, 1892 is when Ellis Island officially opened up for immigration. So from 1855 until December 31st, 1891, people came through Castle Garden. And the reason why, one of the reasons why it changed over to Ellis Island, there was a major fire. Well, no, that was the fire in Ellis Island. So in 1897, once it had moved over to Ellis Island, there was a major fire. So all the records from 1855 onward from Castle Garden were destroyed, because all the buildings were pine and wood, and they didn't even think, oh, these records might be important. So it was like officially mandated when they rebuilt Ellis Island, all the buildings have to be fireproof. So You can go onto, I have it listed on here. You can go onto the website of the Ellis Island Foundation's passenger search. And you can look up information, but you can't find anything from 1855 to 1897 that no ship manifests. So there are certain things you can find. You can look for customs lists. You can look for passenger lists, but you're not going to find any ship manifest, which says every single thing that was on that ship when it came over, that kind of thing. I have listed on your website, I'm not on your work handout, I'm not going to go over every single one, but you have in 1906, the Bureau of Immigration and Naturalization was created. So up until then, information on naturalizations records varied widely. There was no consistency. There was no, it has to ask these questions like on a census or something. You know, you have a very specific columns of questions. But before 1906, it could have these questions, it could have lots of questions, it could have not very many. After 1906, it was standardized. So if you're looking for something before 1906, it's kind of a surprise what you're going to find. Yay, I found this. But if you're looking for something after 1906 in the early 20th century, it's pretty much guaranteed you're going to find certain information. And I have those listed on the website, on the handout if you'd like to read that. The next thing, personal example I wanted to show is, okay, so this is my husband's great-great-great-grandfather, Julius Hermann Guskey. He immigrated from Germany in 1891, which I find interesting because 1891 was that strange year in between Ellis Island and Castle Garden. So I'm assuming he immigrated to Castle Garden, but I don't have Castle Garden actually written on any of his papers that I've come across. But Ellis Island wasn't open yet, so. This is the ship, picture of the ship Normania. This is what he came over on. I thought it was very cool that I found a picture of the actual ship, supposedly. I just wanted to point out, he's really interesting here. Wilhelm II was he was, let's see, I wrote it down. He was the Emperor of Germany and the King of Prussia. And from 1888 to 1918. And see the mustache on Julius? Apparently, the mustache that Wilhelm had was super popular. I'm sure there were lots of guys in the middle of his reign that had that same mustache. And that just shows popular culture and how things that are popular with celebrities are popular with other people around the country, just like that. I thought it was very cute. And then my next picture I have is that he also looks like Inspector Clouseau from Pink Panther. And I think that is just adorable. Isn't Steve Martin so cute? Look, that could totally be Steve Martin. I don't know. I just thought it was a really cute example. And I wanted to share it. Okay, so this is actually the passenger list from 1891. You can see Julius Guskey's name right there. Underneath it, and this is just part of it. I didn't copy, paste the whole thing up here, but it shows gender, occupation, country you came from, place you're planning on going, hailing place. I think that is the town in the country that you came from. So we have Julius Guskey over here, his wife Henrietta, which everywhere I've seen it is Henrietta, but when this was transcribed, they put Henriette. So her name could have been Henriette, but I'm pretty sure it was Henrietta. And then their son Carl and their daughter Ida. And you can see their ages. And they came in through New York, but their destination was officially Michigan. So all of my husband's family is from Michigan. Like I haven't found anybody yet who's not either from Michigan or Germany. But then my husband's like his second wife, like she died the year after they immigrated, unfortunately. Julius's second wife actually was from Illinois. So that side of the family of his wife is like from Illinois, all the places around like Michigan. But anyway, so I thought it was pretty interesting. You can see here his last name is spelled Gustke, but anybody could read that Gusthe, Gus. Guslepe, whatever. So next, I just wanted to point out that this is all the different versions of Gusky that not all of them, I found a lot. These are a few different versions of Gusky, which today is spelled Guske with no T in it. But you have Gursky, you have Guster, you have Gutke, you have Gusky with an I, Gus B with a BE there. So that just shows how maybe their names were all spelled differently, but maybe they weren't. You have to take every name you see with a grain of salt. Yeah. Let's see here. Next, I want to move on to the spelling differences and the accidental name changes. They're not purposeful. These are the not on purpose name changes. You have your silent letters that you know could be there, could not be there. So when you're searching for names, if you can't find it one way, just randomly start adding silent letters. You never know what's going to happen. And then you have other examples over here of maybe transposed letters. So crisp, SP versus crips, PS. Same with dropping one of the T's in Matthews and dropping the S on Owens, and this changing completely from Dixon to Dickens. They sound alike kind of, but they're not. So this is just pronunciation and spelling tips. If you can't find the name, look for it a different way. Try different vowels. I have a good example here. My last name Horne. This is my great-great-grandfather, Joseph Lucas Horne. And he's holding, I'd like to think that is my grandfather, but I don't have anything saying who that little boy was. I just know that's Joseph there. And I think that the one underneath, I'd like to say that that's Lucas, his son, who was named after him. But you can see back in 1717 to 1758 register that I found, Horne was also Hern, Horn, or Horn. So H-E-R-N instead of H-O-R-N. It could have been H-A-R-N for all I know. It could have been any vowel in there except for the O. And then you also see how the E got dropped. It could be with an E, it could not be with an E. Like I was saying before, if they spell it wrong, I don't even care anymore. It doesn't matter. I guess I should for documentation stuff, but it's just too much. My dad says that he has seen it spelled Horn, like H-A-U-R-N. I haven't come across that, but he says he's seen it that way, so I'm gonna take his word for it right now until I can prove it. Let's see. You have commonly misread letters. I put that on this sheet here. FamilySearch.org has I know you can't click on the page, but if you go to FamilySearch.org and just type in commonly misread letters, it pops right up. It's very helpful. Yeah, Family Search is a free site. I heard you. No, it's okay. I'm glad you said it because then I can tell everybody Family Search is a free site. That's why I put it on here so that everybody here could go look at it. I don't want to send y'all anything. No, don't be sorry. I don't want to send y'all anything as a paywall so everybody can get to it. The next trip. Oh, wait, I wanted to show you one more. Okay, so the top says Joseph Horne. And the third one down, Daniel Horne, they're brothers. But one, and they live next door. But one is, I think that's H-O-R-N-E. It might be a flourish, but I think it's an E. And then Daniel Horne, they live right next door. They're brothers, but one has an E and one doesn't. So why? Did the enumerator just not care when he was writing and not notice? Did Daniel actually spell it differently? Was Joseph illiterate and that's how he had memorized it and he got it wrong? Who knows? Was it their children that gave the information? And maybe Daniel's kid thought it was spelled Horn, and Joseph's wife thought it was spelled Horn. So it's just an example in my family of immediate spell. And then this one. Okay, it's the same Joseph Horne from 1900, H-O-R-N, same guy, 1910, H-O-R-N-E. So the enumerator could have spelled it differently. Maybe within that 10 years, he decided it'd be fancy to add the E to the end of it. Who knows? Another thing I thought was cool I wanted to point out, you see Joseph and Vandalia on 1900 census, their daughter, Maggie, who I'm named after, supposedly. So she was 13, I think, in this census here. If you look at the 1910 census, down their neighbors, Joseph Horrell, or no, is that John? John Horrell. Maggie has married, right here, she's 23. She's married John Horrell, and they moved in right next door to her parents. I thought that was fun. I just wanted to point that out. The next tip, always say the name out loud. Even if you think you know how it's pronounced, say it out loud and also say it phonetically. So this first name looks like Bell, could be Bale, but if you say it out loud, it might not be just one syllable. It could be Bailey. You see how that divides up like that? So that happens a lot. So last names that have two syllables unintentionally become names that have one syllable. Another example with Bale that I can give is, Bell's outlet stores. I called it Beal's outlet stores for years. And my mother-in-law was like, I love shopping at Bell's outlet. And I'm like, Bell's outlet, what's that? So that I just looked at it. Maybe it's not Beal's or Bell's. Maybe it's Bailey's outlet, who knows? Say it out loud. Another tip is, no, that's wrong. Sorry. I guess I left out a slide. Another tip for saying out loud, I was going to say, ask your children, little kids, because as they're learning to read, that's how they learn to read. They read phonetically. They see something and they start to write something out. And you know how they always misspell stuff, but it makes sense how they misspell stuff. If you really sit there and try, you can translate what they've written.
I did an experiment here where I wrote down a list of names and I had coworkers say them first.
Yeah.
And then I said it. And almost every one of them was pronounced differently.
Yeah.
So getting someone else to say it, even a child or someone else, it really gives you that other perspective.
Yeah. And so one thing, the next slide that I left out, it said, sometimes your ears can hear things that your eyes can't see. So you're reading something and you totally see it. You can read it fine, but then you hear it and you're like, that's not what I just read, Or if you read something and you say it out loud the way you read it, but then get somebody else to read it out loud, the whole sentence or whatever, and you're like, that's not what I just read. So your ears hear what your eyes can't see. That was a really cool slide that I'm really sorry I left out. I feel bad now. So spelling depends more on, and remember, also at Family Search, the free site, there is a phonetic substitutes table that's very helpful too. So you have misspelled, mispronounced words, commonly misread letters. You also have a phonetic substitutes. So instead of saying Bay, B-E-H, it'll have B-A-I as a substitute. You see what I mean? Okay, so spelling, like I said before, when you want to fit in with your neighbors or the community that you've moved in, always remember spelling depends more on locality than the family whose names were being spelled. In one town, the name Howe, H-O-W-E, might be spelled that way, but in a different town is spelled Howe, H-O-W with no E. So if a Howe moved to a Howe town, the spelling would change. So if a Horne moved to a Horne town, we would change our spelling. So that's just another example of how that could change. Even though they sound the same, they're spelled differently, they come up differently, and you think it's like a purposeful name change, but I think probably 2/3 of name changes are not on purpose, and maybe a small percentage are on purpose. And just like when you're critiquing a work of art, you can't assume what the painter meant when he did things. So when you're reading a genealogical record or information, you can't assume that the person wrote that down a certain way. You can surmise, you can hypothesize, but you can't ever be certain unless you have that documentation. All right. Foreign origins of names. Here we go. You have Isabel with one L at the end versus Isabel with two L's. Isabel is the Spanish version of the name. Isabel is like the French version, or the version I guess we use mostly in the US. And so you have other examples here. Alexei changes to Alex. Edward changes to Edward. Samson changes, for some reason we put a P in there. Who knows why? That's another one of those silent letters. So this is an example of spelling, but it's also an example of how it could be pronounced differently. And so maybe they had their name, their name was Alexei, and they had their name pronounced Alex for so many years. They were like, fine, my name is Alex. So that's an undocumented name change. So earlier I went over, I had a slide about my son's name change. And so next I want to talk a little about LGBTQ name changes and possible reasons for that. So let's see. Most people would not speak of a gender change if a cis male, which cis means I was born a male and I identify as male and nothing has changed. I've always been male. A cis male infant was recorded as a 1-month-old female in a census record, but then the next census record, they're identified as a male. So nobody would think that was a name change or a gender change. They would just think it was a mistake and move on with their lives. So you can't always assume it was a mistake. Most of the time, yes, you can't assume it was a mistake, but this conflicting evidence does need to be taken into account, but you can't say that was just an accident. Sometimes it was on purpose. So record creators in the past may have assumed a gender or assigned a gender that does not reflect, but you always want to strive for precision and clarity. So when you're talking about this information on a census, never say, well, so-and-so said this on that census. Don't actually say he said it, because rarely do we know who gave that information. But what you need to say is very specifically, well, the record shows this, this, and this, or it says on this record, it says, the record says, not he said this or she said that. You always want to be as diplomatic as possible. And as far as LGBTQ names go, dead naming, this is referring to them by their birth name, even if they have legally changed their name, or they're in the middle of transitioning and they haven't legally changed it yet. So you don't want to call them Laura if that was their birth name, but then they change her name later to Lonnie or something. You know what I mean? You don't ever want to call them their old name. Dead naming was a term that didn't become really popular until the 2010s. It wasn't start being used, but is pretty accurate, even though it's kind of harsh. It's kind of a harsh term, dead naming. But you think about it, that name is no longer part of their lives. That name is dead. So you don't want to out them that they changed their name from their dead name to their current name. So when you're doing your genealogy, do not reveal a transgender person's birth name or dead name without explicit permission or consent from them. Just as you would not use a living person's DNA without asking them for it first, explaining why you're using it, and they consent or they don't. Like, I've tried to get DNA from my mom. She doesn't want to give DNA because of the adoption process and everything. She doesn't want me really finding out more about her biological family, and that's her prerogative. I'm very sad. That makes me very, very sad, because she is the only sibling of her biological siblings left alive. So that's just lost. But I can't go out there and sneak some saliva from her and do it without telling her. That is not ethical. So it's the same thing. You wouldn't do that with DNA. You don't do it with LGBTQ, like transgender or name changes. You tell them what it's for, you tell them why you're using it, and you make sure it's okay. If they say no, just don't do it. So if you go to National Genealogical Society has guidelines for sharing information with others. This all refers to living people. And it's a 2-page PDF document. It's not much, but if you want to go over the ethics and their standards for sharing stuff, you can. However, if the person is deceased, there are some public records that any researcher can find. So if you find the birth name of a transgender person and it's out there on Ancestry, then you can keep using it in your records. It's public, so you can keep using it public. Just don't say it out loud. Don't refer to it. Don't make a big deal out of it, you know? We don't make a big deal out of other name changes sometimes. So there's no reason to make a big deal out of this. Records such as birth certificates, like public records, census records, and baptismal books and things like that, they cannot and should not be changed. So, I mean, that's just our history. So, the next slide I have is this is Stuart Tremaine. He is speaking. I wanted to put a little promo in here. He's speaking for Georgia Genealogical Society webinar. It's a free webinar. Anybody can join. If you're interested in more information about this, in October, and you can go to the Georgia Genealogy Society website to register. And 6Gen, that is also his personal website. It's got great blogs on there. He writes all this stuff on there. He can answer any question you have if you have any about name changes. So I just wanted to promote that. And then I have one last slide, and then I'll be ready to take any questions y'all might have. This is another personal example from my family. This is my Uncle Frank, or my husband's great Uncle Frank, and we just called him Uncle Frank. This is not a very good picture. I just have the obituary of his wife, Aunt Violet. And this is actually a photocopy from the paper of Uncle Frank. Aunt Violet died in 2002. Uncle Frank died in 2009. Well, they got married, I don't remember the exact date, in the 30s. They were married. You see over here, this is a picture of them when they were first married. It was a picture in the newspaper from when he turned 100. They were celebrating his 100th birthday. So Frank and Violet were married for 67 years. And for those entire 67 years, he swore up and down they never consummated their marriage. He was a homosexual man, and they married with an understanding. Aunt Violet knew. Aunt Violet was okay with it. I don't know if Aunt Violet never saw other men. Like, it was understood between them that, you know, he would go his way and she would go her way. But to keep things, you know, up and up in the family and in the society, they were together for 67 years and roommates, basically, I guess. And it says in her obituary from 2002, it says she was survived by her husband and foster son, John E. Carroll. 7 years later, in his obituary, it says he was survived by his adopted son, John Carroll Burgess. So in between those 7 years, maybe she didn't approve of this, but he legally adopted the foster son. He was like 35 or 40 years old. So it wasn't like he legally adopted a 14-year-old little kid. It was a grown man. And so I don't think she ever wanted to really have it in her obituary that was Uncle Frank's friend. And he didn't want to put it in his obituary that was his friend, but he legally adopted his partner, John, who so that he could legally pass down family things to him, so that he could legally put him in the will with no questions and able to give him estate and land and money and stuff like that. And that was actually a very common thing. So a lot of times when you see adopted son or whatever, you have to just think real quick. Was this like a little kid who was an adopted son, or was this a common thing that happened in the early 20th century? Maybe it wasn't really his adopted son. Maybe it was his his friend or whatever. So that's just an example. I wanted to show this of possibilities. Another thing over here on this one, it says they raised 2 boys together, one of whom they adopted. Okay, well, the one they adopted was John, but they never had another boy. So why it says they have 2 boys, a family member gave the wrong information. A family member thought somebody was their son, but he was just a friend. We have no idea. I've tried to find out. There's no second son. There's no, they never had biological children together. So that's just something else I have to research and find out what's going on. So I think, oh, my last slide, it's just 500 popular surnames globally, and you can see different last names that are the most popular throughout the world. And Smith looks like it's the largest one. If you can see, Thomas is over there on top of Wilson. Thomas is much smaller than I thought it would be because I meet so many people with the same last name as me. I just thought that was funny. I thought Thomas would be at least as big as like Johnson or Garcia. But there you go.
I think Brown would be on there as well. Bigger.
Oh, yeah. Brown is bigger than Thomas. But that's everything I have. And I have a few minutes if y'all have any questions or want me to go back to another slide or conversation or anything.
All right. Well, thank you very much.